We're delighted to be with you in this week of Learning at Work Week, and thanks so much to our friends at the Open University for inviting us. I'm going to turn this slide off for a moment, and I'll tell you a bit more about us and me. So I'm Hugh Reynolds. I'm head of digital at an organisation called Management Futures, where we do all sorts of things to enable people, organisations and teams to thrive in whatever sort of work they do. So we're interested in them as human-centered professionals. And I'm a human, and I'm going to start at the center of me and my own journey. So I've got a very, very long-term relationship with the Open University, which is well over 40 years of a relationship now. And I want you to picture a scene. Okay, it's around 1983, and I get up very early, before my parents get up, about 6 a.m. I go downstairs in my pajamas, and I turn on the TV. And I'm hoping it was old-fashioned TV. We didn't have a controller or anything like that. I had to press physical buttons, and I was hoping for Roland Rat or Saturday Live, one of those kids programs. And there were only 3 or 4 channels at that time, and all I really got was grey fuzz. Or sometimes I'd get this. I don't know if you remember these guys. So Phil this morning told me that it was well. Phil had ideas about who this might be, but I don't know their names. But they were big characters in my early life. I don't know about yours. So this is what I saw on most of the channels. But on BBC Two, there was something else. On BBC Two, through the night and in the early hours of the morning, there'd be Open University programmes. And so I kind of stumbled into learning. I kind of fell into this thing called learning in a really big way. And it wasn't a trap. It opened up whole vistas of knowledge and culture to me. Yeah, I was kind of pretty humble background, and through my TV, I got access to ideas. I saw programs on the Age of Enlightenment. I saw programs on multidimensional Hilbert spaces. I saw programs on sexual selection and Bayesian mimicry, right? And these intellectual things still really deeply matter to me as a person, and they set me on a path. So in school, I got terrific advice from many of my teachers, not all, but many. I got some great advice, and I became an expert in receiving advice, and I kept learning. And for many years, my job involved giving oodles of advice. I became a teacher, and I became a lecturer at the OU and other universities and colleges. I did postgraduate work at the OU, receiving more advice. And I had various roles in the science faculty and the business school at the Open University. And I was very often being called upon to give, we called it IAG, information, advice, and guidance. And then something changed. So I discovered coaching. I had some coaching, and it was actually through a course to develop leaders at the OU that I discovered this new approach, a different approach, and I got really curious about it. And I started working with this guy called Phil Hayes, Phil on the call today, and his colleagues at Management Futures. And it kind of changed something inside me. And I want to share something of that change with you today. So that's my story. I'm going to try and share another slide with you, if I may. And it's just really to remind me of all the many, many things that we do at Management Futures. So we do coaching. What we're talking about today, not giving advice, not falling into advice traps, is this profession of coaching. And we do teaming, and we work with we work with all sorts of organizations. We work in the field, I often call it inclusive leadership. So we're talking about high performing teams. We want to help people to belong within their organizations. We very concerned with diversity and inclusion. We're very concerned with cultures and developing inclusive cultures where people can thrive. So we do all this kind of stuff. Sometimes we do it in a very formal way. We've got an intensive coaching skills course where people come for 4 days, and really it's a baptism of fire into coaching and lots of coaching practice. And we do all sorts of other things where we're putting coaching and this approach of not giving advice, not directing people, we put that at the very heart of the stuff that we do. Let me stop sharing that slide. I might share some more in a moment. So that's what we do with Management Futures. And I've spoken a lot about me. I've spoken a lot about Management Futures, but let's get really personal with my colleague Phil. Hello, Phil. How are you doing?
Hello to you. I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm I'm very well. I'm very well.
Pretty
Great, great.
energized by the time.
Fantastic, thank you. That's what we will be talking about energy through this session today quite a lot, and great to be sharing some energy with you today. Now, I was inspired as well as by the BBC and great institutions like the Open University. I've also been inspired by a journalist from the middle of the last century called John Gale. He used to turn up, you know, and he might be interviewing a great celebrity, or he might be there on a picket line asking people questions. And the first thing he'd ask, he'd say, "Hello, what would you like me to ask you?" And that's what I did to Phil this morning. And he gave me a question that I would never have thought of and I would never have asked, but I'm gonna ask him now. So Phil, just so that we can find out a little bit more about you, please could I ask, why are you still coaching at such an allegedly advanced age? Why are you coaching still?
Extremely advanced, Hugh. Look, Hugh, your enthusiasm is one of the reasons why I'm doing this, and the response that you've had to coaching and being in a kind of coaching environment is what keeps me going in coaching. I just feel hugely privileged to be coaching gifted, important people, to teach and train coaching to people who are enthusiastic, who are going to do great things with their own coaching skills. It's a world where we help people to achieve what they want to achieve and to fulfill their potential. And to be part of that is, as I said before, a really huge privilege. That's why I do it.
Thank you, Phil. And we're glad that you're still here doing this and giving us your
I was
time and
actually teaching
attention.
yesterday and the day before, so I've got a slightly hoarse voice, so please bear with me.
Will do, Phil. Thanks ever so much. And I'm going to go to some slides and tell people what we're hoping to achieve today, what we will achieve, and what we will deliver. So, and I've made this slide. I got told off actually because it's not our usual brand at Management Futures. We've got our branded slides, but I've put on top of it something spiky because this is what I think we can sometimes find at the bottom of an advice trap. So we want to avoid those advice traps. We want to understand what they are and we want to avoid them. And we want to produce more energy for change, the energy that Phil was talking about there. And here's the lineup. So today we're going to help you spot advice traps before you fall headfirst into them. And at some stage in the session today, Phil is going to push me into an advice trap just so that we can see what happens then. And we also want to demonstrate the difference between advice giving and taking that non-directive approach. We want to give and have insightful conversations about the dangers of advice in disguise. So sometimes advice can be smuggled in under the radar. We don't quite realize that we're doing it, but it can be received as a direction. And finally, we'd really like to suggest where you might go next. So if you've become curious about coaching like I did, if you know something about it but want to know more about our approach, or you might be quite frustrated, you might think, well, I know about coaching, but I don't really see how I can apply it in my work or in my life, then we've got some ideas about that and we'll tell you about them at the end. Central to that, before I forget, is that both Phil and I and our colleagues and our friends at the Open University have produced 2 short courses that introduce these ideas and introduce these approaches, both in a formal way, if you want to do coaching yourself, but also if you want to apply these principles in your organization. So, Phil, have you got energy to move on to the next slide? Would that be okay?
Sure, let's do it.
Fantastic. So we're going to start with some principles. And these are things that are at the very center of so much that we do in Management Futures. I've kind of taken these and messed around with them a little bit. So I hope you still recognize these 6 principles, Phil, because I've put them in my language. But would you please take us through them?
Certainly, Hugh. And I just reflect we've been working to these principles for about a quarter of a century at Management Futures. We developed them well back in the 20th century, and they've been very robust in their application. They're pretty much the same as when we first drafted them, and they really hold our coaching approach together. And their principles, they're not really intellectual principles in the sense of being intellectual truths. They're more about our mindset, our attitude, and our assumptions when we coach. And they're really important. They're a really important foundation to everything else that we do when we take a coaching approach. We have to get our mindset first to begin with. So just to move into them, we assume when we're coaching, that the person we're coaching, the person we're talking to, is a resourceful person. And that might sound a bit of wishful thinking, but it's hugely important. So even when people show up, perhaps not at their best, perhaps they've had a setback, perhaps they're feeling a little bit sore about something, perhaps they've had a disappointment, we don't believe there's anything wrong with them. We believe, in fact, that they are hugely resourceful people, and our role is to help them to connect to that resourcefulness, to be their full selves, to fulfill their potential. And we can only do that if we help to draw that out, not if we, to use your words, fall into an advice trap of trying to tell them what's good for them. That's really the heart of it. We believe our clients are resourceful people, and that's our job, just to develop that resourcefulness. Moving to the third point, we don't just coach issues. We're not just problem solvers. We engage with what we call the whole person, the whole and unique person, in fact, to find or to help them to find ways forward which suit them in all their individuality, their personality, their background, their culture, their history, their working environments, their living environments. All of that's going to be unique to them. So we aim to help them to find their own bespoke solutions. And it follows, it's their agenda. We never seek to impose what we think is good for them. We help them to find out what they know is good for themselves by helping them to think through what they want to achieve and why they want to achieve it. So it's always focused on what they want to achieve themselves. And we never take the position of expert. We take the position of learning partner, and we aim to show respect, we aim to share status, we aim to work as a small team of two, basically, with both parts of that team doing everything they can to help the coachee, the person being coached, to achieve their goal. And that last word, goal, is fundamental to what we're trying to do. We're not just having cozy conversations, we're having really purposeful conversations aimed at helping them to identify what they want to change, what they want to achieve, and to focus the conversation squarely on that. So the initial part of almost any coaching conversation is about what do you want to get from this conversation, what must you get from this conversation. And that's really it, Hugh. And I've kind of nutshelled most of those things. Just to say, though, I've noticed through training coaches for 20 odd years now, when coaching gets a little bit weak, it's normally because one or more of those principles is not being followed. They all work together and they all have to be in place simultaneously.
Great, Phil. So there's some tasty nuts there for people not allergic to nuts. And, I know there's a lot of unpacking. And behind these, something that strikes me is that when you see these principles, they look quite simple. And you often say to me, like I often see this in my work, that, yeah, it looks simple, but it's not easy. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, simple but not easy, I think would almost describe the coaching approach. At face value, following those principles is quite simple, but it's really hard to do. There is so much learning we have to do to be able to enact those principles in action. If you look at a coaching conversation from the outside without knowing what it is, it might look like a regular conversation. It might even look easy and straightforward. It might look as if it's almost automatically achieving results, but a lot goes on behind the scenes. A lot of training, learning, and practice goes on behind that to make what looks simple also feel easy, particularly for the client, the person on the receiving end. We want it to be easy for them to think. We're trying to make thinking as easy as possible for them. So that's what we aim to do. But it's not easy for us to get to that stage where we can be really good at it.
Thank you, Phil. Well, let's have a little look under the bonnet of some of these, and
Yeah,
also
yeah.
maybe you've given a great case about why, if we want to take this approach, we should use these principles, and if we take one away where coaching doesn't work or doesn't prosper, perhaps one of these principles is impaired or not present. But maybe we need to say something more about why it works. Yeah, justify the reason that we adopt this approach so frequently. And I know, Phil, because I come to you for advice sometimes and ask you explicitly for it. You are an expert in many, where we're talking about NLP and aspects of psychology and these kind of things that I don't know about and you know about, that you teach me as an expert. But you also sort of make it clear to me when you're in a coaching mode. Would that be fair?
Yeah, for sure. Coaching is for some things, it's not for every single thing. If you definitely know something for sure and have some expertise in it, then it's fine to share that. What I would say is it's still up to the recipients about what they do with it. We're,
Yeah.
we're not being directed when we do offer our learning and our expertise. We're not suggesting that people have to follow it or they have to do with it exactly what we think. We offer it only as information to be helpful. So I'd probably just leave that there. If that's okay with
Thanks,
you.
Phil. Thanks for that clarification, and we may come back to that later in the session. But for this next slide, let's sort of do as promised. Tell us about why it works.
Yeah, I'll come to the bullet points in a moment. I just would say as an opening piece, though, people really only act on self-discovered learning. There's a lot of evidence around this. People really act when they discover stuff for themselves. They don't really like being told what to do, unless it's something which is so fundamental they know they have to do it. So that's the kind of background piece, I believe, that people like to act on learning they discover for themselves. And why it works in practice is because the relationship and the attention that the coach can give somebody being coached conveys what the psychologist Carl Rogers coined the term unconditional positive regard. It means giving them respect. It gives giving people consideration regardless of what they bring, regardless of how they express themselves, and gives them the sense that they are important and that they are well regarded. And that creates psychological safety. People feel they feel trust in the relationship. They feel safe to explore their thoughts and their thinking. They feel that they can believe in the coach to help them in a way that has integrity and safety to it. And finally, it employs the skills of pull. And I've had this discussion with you before, Hugh, but I remember when I was at school a very long time ago, we were told that education was really about not pushing stuff into people, but pulling stuff out. And I believe that then, and I believe it now, that if you allow people, if you facilitate people emerging their resourcefulness, if you facilitate people fulfilling their potential, it's a hugely powerful learning approach. So we don't tell people what to do. Instead, we engage with them. We create rapport. We tune into them. We listen deeply and carefully and attentively. We summarize to show that we've heard them and that we're paying full attention to what they're saying. And we use what we like to call powerful questions. We can talk about this a little bit later, but powerful questions are essentially questions that we've evolved and honed so they have maximum effect in helping people to think. And we do all of that rather than offering advice, which we know to be pretty ineffective in a coaching context. That's probably as simple as I can put it here.
Thank you very much for putting it in those terms, Phil. And I might just summarize. It's this aspect of pulling rather than pushing.
Yeah,
Not seeing somebody as a vessel to be filled up with our own stuff, but somebody who has the ability to do things themselves and to think about things in their way. And that quote that people are seeing on the right hand side of their screen, hopefully, by giving them space, you're facilitating their best thinking. And I thought about how to highlight this, and first I highlighted best, and then I thought, no, it's there. It's their thinking that we're focused on here. And I wonder
100%.
if we could move on to a shape that's very important to us
Yeah.
in our work, and that shape really describes the shape of a conversation, how a conversation ebbs and flows. And I wonder whether you could take us through this. Now, even the vegetarians amongst us at Management Futures love this shape. They love kippers. We don't wear the ties anymore, these garish paisley things from the 60s, but we are very fond of kippers. Can you tell us why, Phil?
Yeah. Hugh, there are a number of ways of describing coaching. There are a number of sort of models of coaching, and we have borrowed and adapted from some of those to produce what we believe is a really clear representation of how a coaching conversation should work. And the shape of the kipper is really important because what we're trying to suggest is that where the kipper is wide is where people are doing the most open thinking, and where it is narrow or narrower, we that's where we aim to have thinking which is very focused and very directional. So you'll see that the tail of the kipper, as it were, we tend to start off by establishing what the core issues are that the client wishes to discuss, and we narrow that down into clear goals for the session. So we do a bit of open thinking about what they want to talk about, then we narrow down to a very distinct goal. As I said before, goal focus is what gives coaching its energy. Then through the IPP stages, which I'll let people read for themselves, we do a lot of exploration. We encourage thinking, we encourage new ideas, we might challenge, we might use some tools and techniques to help specific aspects of their thinking. And then as we get towards the nose end of the kipper, we then start to think about what next. Where's all this thinking going in terms of change or action that our client might want to make? And by the end of it, we are aiming for them to be very clear about what happens after the coaching conversation, with a sense that they've done the thinking which allows them to make the best decisions about what they want to do. That's really what the shape is all about. If you look at it another way, it's a kind of map of where you are in the conversation. And though we don't automatically move through it in a kind of robot-like way, it is a good way of knowing where you are in a conversation and keeping on track.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had the privilege of listening to you coach and being coached by you, but also have a great privilege of observing and listening in to people who are training to be coaches.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to hear the sort of flow of this conversation, how in those sort of P sections that the conversation goes really wide and people say, well, I could do that, I could do this, maybe we could look at that, and we'll be talking about many different things. And then, you know, in a masterful way, a great coach will hold people to account and get them to converge on the thing that they want to be doing. So we're coming to that head of the kipper and zooming in on one particular thing that we can then hold ourselves to account about for them to go on and work on and to work towards that goal. So
That's
thanks
really
ever so much thanks Phil for approving my little summary there. And you know, we'd love to show people this in action, but maybe before we do that and show people what we do when we're having a coaching type conversation or when we're using these non-directive methods, avoiding those traps, what happens when we fall into a trap? So I've done this quite violent slide that but it's myself having befalling these horrors at this point. So first, let's push me into an advice trap, and I wonder perhaps it's both of us, Phil, falling into this as well. So
Yeah.
are you okay if we do some demo of how not to do it first? Would that be
Yeah,
okay?
let's bring this to life and look at what it looks like and feels like in action.
Sure. Thank you, Phil. So I'm going to come to Phil now. I've known Phil for several years. He's not my manager. He's a trusted colleague, and I've come to him and I've got a problem.
So Hugh, what is the problem that you come with?
Well, Phil, it's good you asked that, and it is a real problem that I've got here. I'm actually looking at it now. I'm looking at 7 folders on my desktop that are where I put my creative projects. So they're things that interest me, that I'm working on. They're all useful things that I should be doing in my role, but I'm just not finishing them. I'm just not getting, I don't know what it is, but I'm not getting to the end of these really exciting creative projects that I've got here on my desktop.
Well, what's stopping you, Hugh? Why don't you just finish them?
Well, there's always something else to do, Phil. You know, we've got to run this show today. There's lots of people in my inbox wanting help. You know, my bosses are coming in with new things quite a lot, and you know, there's these things that I'm talking about. They're for me. They're to develop my role in the business. They're also kind of more strategic things, I guess. So
Okay.
I'm just leaving them on the desktop there, and I'm not.
Well, look,
not
Hugh, what
attempting
I'm hearing here is something pretty common. It's a sort of time and energy management issue. So many people come to coaching with very similar issues, you know, or come for advice on similar issues. Actually, as I talk to you now, I'm just going to encourage the people on the call to think about when they might have a little bit of an issue managing their time or their workload, because some of the stuff I'm about to say might have relevance and usefulness to them. So let's hear what I think, Hugh, about this and how you can sort this out. Hugh, number one thing I often tell people is look at the Eisenhower matrix. The Eisenhower matrix. I know you know
Is
this.
that Eisenhower, like
Dwight
president?
Eisenhower, President of the United States,
Eisenhower.
who
Okay.
in essence, he said there are two kinds of problems: important problems that aren't urgent and urgent problems that aren't important. Out of that came a matrix that I know you're familiar with. It'll help you to organize your time and understand what you really should be focusing on. So do that for sure. Another way of doing this, probably more simple, is to divide all those projects into stuff that you must do, stuff that you should do, and stuff that maybe you could do, and don't bother too much about the stuff that you could do.
Okay.
Treat that as the last sort of priority.
Right.
Finally, I often say to people, you have to have some uninterrupted time. You have to have some discretionary time. Even if it's tough to carve it out, I think it's essential you have some time where you can do some thinking, clarify what you're trying to do in that moment without interruption. Part of that, I think, is about making sure that you're not constantly dipping into emails and calls, other things which might distract you. Look at your. Are you listening to me here? Look at your emails perhaps at certain times of the day,
Okay.
so you can give them proper focus. And finally, Hugh, from time to time, to turn your phone off. And if somebody comes to you with another thing to do, practice just saying no. And I think if you did all those things, you'd find it much, much easier to manage your workload.
Right. Okay, Phil. Thanks.
Good. Well, I'm glad we've sorted that. Let's just check in, Hugh.
Right. So we're timing out now. We're coming out of roll. Okay.
So that's me falling into the advice trap with you, Hugh. Just thinking that I know best, coming from a place of wanting to be helpful, but thinking that my wisdom's helpful. So let me just check in with you, and perhaps people on the call might reflect on how they felt about my advice. What did you learn that was new for you here?
Well, I knew about Eisenhower matrix. I think I did that on a course at the OU actually. And I do think about that, but there's lots of urgent things. It's almost like I've read the textbook on that, but the world hasn't, and my boss hasn't. Well, he probably has, but it's still sending in new, unexpected, urgent things that need doing. So I felt quite low at that. Also about the time, just because I pride myself quite well on managing my time. Actually, I do a lot of things, and I allocate time, and yet I also have to flex and step up and
Okay.
do extra things.
Let me just check in with you. What of what I suggested will you actually do?
Yeah, I'm interested by the Eisenhower technique, but I've tried it in the past. I won't do that. Yeah.
What
Yeah,
about
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I'll
stuff?
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
should do. It's what my bosses think I should do and what I think I should do might be different things. So I'm feeling a bit like, and I also feel quite sad because you said these things that could happen. I know that I want to achieve these things because they're great. They might be world-changing ideas, these, even if I do say so myself. But they're certainly ones that change me as a person into a brighter person.
So look, I was giving you. We were in the advice trap together. How much energy for change did that create for you?
Not much, Phil, I would say.
Not much. So how did you feel being on the receiving end of that well-meaning advice?
It's odd because I know that, well, I know already, but I knew during our conversation that you care for me. It's coming from a good place, right? I think your advice. So I
So how do you feel?
appreciated it.
Just be blunt.
I don't feel helped. I
No,
don't feel happier.
No, I didn't get the look on your face was kind of telling me you weren't getting much energy from it. What did it say about our relationship? And if we were to conduct a relationship like that all the time, what would that be like for you?
For you, that would be quite draining.
For you?
Yeah, quite draining for
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
Okay. I often, when I do this kind of thing with people, I ask them, did they have a version of kind of yes, but going on in their heads when they were listening to my advice? I just wonder if that was the case for you.
Yeah, very much so, particularly on the email thing, because I try that, and it gets blasted out of the water when I try to do these things. Yeah.
So my theory is that on the whole, with issues like this, people sort of know what they ought to be doing, but that's not really the issue. There's an issue behind the issue about what's going on, and my belief is that a coaching approach, a non-directive approach, is far more effective at
Okay.
helping them to discover that. And I'm wondering if we could kind of wind back the clock
Yep.
and sort of try a coaching approach rather than an advisory approach.
Okay. So we're gonna
We're
pull
gonna get out of
me,
this
or
trap.
I'm gonna pull myself out somehow with
Yeah,
your facilitation. Is that right? Yeah. Okay.
100%.
Cool.
So I'm going to assume the 6 principles are now in place here, that we're
Mhm.
working in partnership, that we're working on your agenda, not mine, that we are going to focus on your resourcefulness, and we're going to get to a point where you can do something that you need to do. So let's put this out straight over to you.
Mhm.
What's the goal for you from this conversation? What would you like to achieve?
Oh, well, I think I'd love to feel better about these folders, Phil. You know, these folders that sit on my desktop. I'm looking at them now, and they're 7 things, 7 projects that I'm in the middle of. They're things I love doing. Actually, I really like doing. I mean, some involve you, Phil. You know, like the one we're talking about, creative writing. Um, I really want to get to these, but I never do,
Okay.
or I rarely do. Yeah.
So let's get to a really specific goal for this conversation. How will you know this has been a good conversation for you?
Well, ultimately, I'll know when I haven't got these same 7 folders. I'll probably have others, but when I haven't got these 7 folders on my desktop, they're actually finished, or maybe just one of them is finished, and I've only got 6. That would be quite good for me.
Okay, so summarize for me, if you would, what do you specifically want to take away from, let's say, the next 5 or 7 minutes?
Okay, I'd love to go away with the energy. We're using this word a lot, but I think it's important that, like, the energy to go off and the permission, perhaps, to go off and work on one of these folders and finish
Okay,
it.
okay. So let's have a go at getting into that state, and that with that aim in mind, and with the energy issue in mind as well, how you feel about what you want to be doing, what your
Mm.
motivation is, and let's see what we can do about that. So let's um let's see what's happening at the moment. What makes this an issue for you right now?
Um, well, I feel like I'm working really hard on lots of fronts. My health hasn't been so great recently, but I've made a lot of improvements in that. So I'm still struggling a little bit with my health. Getting back on top of workload, seeing these things, and they're kind of like a sweet, or something sweet in my life that I want to cherish, and I can't because I've got stacks of marking, stacks of other stuff to be doing, workshops to be developing. You know, I've got stacks of stuff here, Phil.
You've got
Um,
stacks of stuff there. So,
mm.
so look, I know that you don't talk about these things lightly, Hugh, but what makes this important? What makes this really important to you?
I feel like my job, which is one that I appreciate, and I know I'm very privileged to have a job where I can control what I do to some extent, and I've not got somebody looking over my shoulder telling me what to do, and I really appreciate that. Um, but these are kind of the fun things that make a difference, not just to me, but also to the business. So they're new, exciting ways of communicating. You know, they're projects that I think, you know, certainly some of them could be really powerful projects, for me personally in my career as well.
If I may just say, I just noticed a change in energy already as you talk about that, about what you want to do for yourself and what you want to do for the business too.
Mm-hmm.
It's palpable that you have that kind of energy for it. So thinking about energy, how much energy do you have to make a difference to yourself in this around this issue? If you think about a scale of 1 to 10, for example, how much energy have you got to deal with this issue?
Um, I feel like um, I've got some energy, but not as much as I'd like.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. So let's think about what you would like actually. And if we had an ideal world scenario,
mhm,
where everything was going just as you wanted in terms of your workload
mm.
management, what would an ideal scenario look like?
Ideal scenario would be that I have time to attend to these things and the other important things that I need to do to keep the business afloat, and keep my bosses content that I'm doing a good and profitable job for them. Um, Also, it'd be lovely that if other people knew about these things and
Oh,
approved of them in some way, or got excited by them a little bit, or maybe even a lot. I'd love to share some of these things, really.
yeah, and I'm just struck again by the enthusiasm with which you're talking about that, and by the fact that it's not just about you. It's just that you're very keen to have other people benefit from what you're doing as well. So let's think about when you have been successful. You haven't got where you are today, Hugh, without having some success in your life. So when you've been on top of your workload, when you've been successful in the past, what can you learn from those successes?
So I know that when I've given myself time, I achieve things. So, for example, when I I went to a conference recently, and I had time to be thinking about other ideas, and I came back full of all sorts of things that I want to share. So I know that when I give myself the time, things happen. Also, when I'm in a different environment, I can be stimulated, and I spend a lot of time in this room.
Okay, so you know at least a couple of things that tend to be very helpful.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sort of struck by that. You already know some things that might help. What stops you doing those things?
I
Actually,
guess habit.
let me rephrase that question.
Mm.
How do you stop yourself doing those things?
Mm. How do I stop myself doing them? Yeah, that I mean, I wouldn't put it that way, Phil, because like I don't send myself well, it's other people sending me emails and sending me the work. But I guess I stop myself by opening myself up to what they need and what they're asking
Okay.
for, opening myself up to being a helpful person rather than somebody who's
Okay.
doing the stuff that they want to do.
So by being helpful, which I know is important to you,
Mm.
by being helpful, it sounds as if you might not be helping yourself to be helpful.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
an interesting way of putting it, Phil. Yeah.
Yeah. I just remember, we talked about unconditional positive regard earlier, and Carl Rogers said you can't have unconditional positive regard for others without having unconditional positive regard for yourself.
Mm.
So it's that just came to me when I was thinking
Mm.
about you needing to look after yourself. But I'm not going to advise you. I'm hopefully just bringing that to your attention.
Mm.
As a thought piece. So let's look at some real options here. Let's think about what is possible, and then perhaps we can think about what might be doable for you.
Mm.
So why don't we just pause for a bit and think, what could you possibly do?
I could pretend to be at a conference. I could pretend to have a face-to-face workshop to go to on the train. I love trains. I do loads of work on used to do loads of
Uh,
work on the train. So yeah, getting myself into that sort of other environment, um, that feels that feels good. I feel good just thinking about getting into that other
yeah, yeah.
environment
So
to do
changing
these things.
environments comes up quite a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah,
When we're talking.
yeah.
Okay, let's just mark that as being potentially very important. What other possibilities are there?
Um, well, my boss is a very busy bloke, but I think I want to share more with them. Um, yeah, I want to share more and maybe get buy-in for this stuff because I feel quite
Okay,
lonely at the moment with this
still quite
stuff.
lonely.
Like I'm carrying it. Um,
Okay, so
yeah.
you do need to voice what's going on by the sound
Mm.
of it, and you're particularly keen to get your boss's buy-in for doing things a little bit differently.
Mm.
Okay, so that's another potential action for you, but let's continue thinking about other ideas. I'll just push you until you stop. What other ideas might there be for dealing with this?
I rejected it earlier about the protected time. Um, but I think there might be something in that if we combine it with environment. Because if I'm here at my desk, things are pinging, or I feel like I should be doing a certain kind of work. So I think if I could protect that time and be somewhere else, that would really help.
Okay, I sense a sort of pattern forming here in your thinking. Let's just. I mean, there may be other options, but we've just got slightly limited time at the
Hmm.
moment. So,
Hmm.
on the proviso that we might have another conversation where we could look at even more options. Um, Given how we've got so far, what might you now do in terms of taking positive action?
One thing I'm going to do is perhaps stop looking. Well, not perhaps I will, because I know I've known you long enough, Phil, that you won't let that slip when I say things like
I was about to
perhaps I
pounce on
will.
perhaps, yeah, yeah. So
I
you
will
will.
stop looking at these folders by turning off my monitor and going and working on another screen, or at least sort of planning out what I want to do with these things, and coming back and clicking on the folder.
Okay, so there's a real intention there that you're giving yourself. How will you keep tabs on that? You know, how will you make sure you're going to do that over a period of time, not just once or twice?
I think I'm gonna discuss it with my boss, actually, that this is something I want to be showing. I want to be showing progress on it, and that will help me, having promised and committed and made something visible to somebody else. I think that would probably help me.
Okay, so I hear you saying there's another clear action for you there.
Mm.
I'm just wondering when you might do that.
I will do that later today, actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
that's for
I'll
sure.
do it before I clock off tonight. Yeah.
Okay, before I clock off tonight. All right. Okay, so there are a couple of things here which you're committing to doing. One is a short-term thing for today. Another is something you'll continue to do. How does that now sound and feel to you?
It feels like something I can do. It
Okay.
definitely feels doable. Something that is within my power
Okay.
to manage, really.
And how does your energy feel to do it?
Yeah, it's high. It's not sky high, but it's higher for this afternoon, and it's higher for, yes, I can make some inroads on things this afternoon, certainly.
Okay. I just want to say, look, you know, anytime you want to come back and have another go at this, we if you want to continue this conversation, it's useful to you. I'm around, you know. So let's keep that invitation open. But let's pause now because of the time we have on this call.
Thank you, Phil.
Uh,
Thank you.
um, thank you for doing that. I want to ask you the same kind of questions as we asked in the trap.
Mhm.
Um, what did you learn that time? What did you learn when we took a non-directive approach?
I think this word environment, I think I've introduced it. I don't think you introduced it, Phil. That popped up, and that surprised me. So I
Okay.
learned something about my interest in that as an environment, and it can be difficult, particularly when you've been unwell, to get out and about and get away from your usual quarters. So yeah, that surprised me, and I learned something.
Okay, so there was some definite learning for you, so a surprise piece of learning. And how convinced are you will do what you said you'll do?
Yeah, well, we've also got the people on the call today, Phil, who've heard me say this, so very convinced that I'll take this first step, and
Okay,
maybe to be, committing also to doing it again, doing it tomorrow,
okay,
subject to meetings, um, doing that tomorrow. Yeah.
great. Okay, that's great to hear. And um, how did you feel about that style of conversation compared to the conversation we had in the advice trap, which is pretty much one way from me actually in the advice trap? How did you
Mm.
feel about the two different conversations?
So I think my thought processes had to work harder, and I had to give more, but I was also getting more back. I think certainly from you, and you challenged me a couple of times, and you were also sort of giving me the space to do some thinking myself, and that felt good, that I'm owning those ideas. I think ideas are very important to me. So not because they're so great, but because they're mine, right?
Sure.
And that made a big difference.
And finally, I'll ask the question I asked before, which is, how do you feel about us? How does our relationship sit within that kind of conversation, as opposed to in the advice trap?
Yeah, I'm getting the same. I think you call it unconditional positive regard. I'm getting the same regards and respect. Um, and I'm more likely to come back to you, actually, Phil.
Okay.
Much
Oh,
more
good.
likely than
I'm,
I have
I'm
been in the
pleased to hear
past.
that.
Yeah.
I always enjoy talking with you. I just want to say that I feel better in that conversation too. When I was in the advice trap with you, I felt there's a lot of pressure on me to kind of get it right and to come up with the answers. And this time, I was able to relax a bit, thinking I
Mm,
know Hugh can think his way through this.
yeah.
I know Hugh's resourceful. So for me, it was much more pleasant as well.
Mm. Thank you,
All
Phil. I
right.
think, and thanks for doing that, because that was genuinely beneficial. And also, we want to give space today for people to ask
For sure.
questions and
For
do all
sure.
that. I'm just going to flash up a couple of slides, and these are really just prompts, I guess, before we go into the Q&A, because we did promise that we talk about this thing, advice in disguise, and really grateful to you, Phil, for giving me some of these phrases to watch out for when we're having a discussion with somebody else, where we're saying, if I were you, I'd, or have you thought of? So sometimes when we work with people in the early stages of their coaching journey, they're saying these things naturally without thinking that it's advice, but it's a way that we can smuggle things in. Oh, another client of mine tried. And what I
Yeah,
really appreciated, sorry, Phil, you say that because I noted a point in our
I'm
conversation.
just kind of smiling because
Yeah,
I when I work on coaching courses, I hear these things quite a lot from people as they're beginning their coaching journey, and they're not even aware it's advice in disguise. You know, they sort of think they're being in coaching mode. If I were you, I'll just step back a bit. I just think all these things come from a good place generally. They'll usually come from wanting to be helpful,
yeah,
thinking you're being helpful. But if I were you, I'd assume that what's good for you is good for them. And as we were discussing earlier, we were talking through the principles. What's good for one person might not be the ideal solution for another. So we need to be very watchful of thinking that what's good for us is good for somebody else. It may be,
absolutely.
but equally it might not be. Um,
Absolutely. Those assumptions I'm hearing are very important throughout coaching. I'm just going to
that's
speed us
it.
along, Phil, just to our final contentful slide,
Yeah.
because we talk about clean language, and this is one of the ideas that you meet in training with us, or the OU courses, and any kind of aspect of this, where we're minding what we say. We think words matter, and we mind what we say, and we use more of our conversational partners. And I noticed at various stages you were repeating things that I'd said. I think I mentioned lonely at one point, and you repeated that as a
Yeah.
way to reinforce my language. But Phil, very, very quickly, because we really don't have any time, but this
Okay.
middle bullet point about feeling wise, I wanted to be wise. As a teacher, I felt good to be wise and be giving out this stuff. And how much of what you are saying in conversation comes down to your need as a manager, perhaps as a colleague, to feel wise. Just say a little thing on that before we go into Q&A.
Well, many of the people that I coach, this is rather a oblique way of looking at it, are wise. In their spheres, they are experts, they're experienced, they're sometimes very eminent people, and we do need wisdom. I think the counterpoint to that is what's wise in some contexts might not be wise in others.
Mm,
And in coaching, we're looking at the very unique context of one individual in their unique circumstances. So it's good to be wise. It's good to share wisdom. It's good to have a growing sense of knowledge, and um, a sense that we're developing. But
mm,
the counterpoint is the trap of falling into that advice
yeah,
trap.
yeah,
And at least that bit about that last point on dependency, Hugh. If let's take a work situation where somebody could always go to their boss for their wise advice. Where's
mm,
the learning for them? Where do they develop? Where's their growth? And actually, what happens is the boss ends up doing most of the work, and the other person doesn't develop.
yeah.
So, and we know from our research that bosses who coach rather than advise, they save their own time because they're helping the other person to grow and to develop their own capabilities.
Thank you, Phil. That was whistle stop. You've crammed a
Bit
lot
quick, but
into this, and
yeah,
thank you
yeah.
so much for doing that and working under this particular pressure today. Um, we would love whatever you have heard in the last 50 minutes, and whatever you want to do with this. We wish you well with developing these skills, considering them, having a conversation about what we've been talking about today. Some things that we suggest might be interesting, if you're interested in this field. There's a couple of courses, short courses from the Open University, written in conjunction with us, written in partnership with us at Management Futures. If you go to that link that I'll leave up on screen for a while, you might like to whip out your smartphone and go to that QR code. If you can scroll to the bottom of the same page, You can find details of our newsletter, Future Focused, and we're also on LinkedIn. So if you want goodies, resources, ideas, stimulation, excitement, those kind of things, that's what we're hoping to provide in this world of coaching and related activities. So I'm going to stop there with apologies to everybody in the audience for overrunning a little bit. And somewhere in the cloud is my my colleague Emily Hill. Hello, Emily.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Hugh and Phil. That was so insightful. We had lots of great engagement in the chat actually. So I thought whilst we're waiting for any questions, obviously the Q&A is open. So if anyone would like to ask any questions, please do. But whilst we're waiting for those questions to come through, I thought it would be a great opportunity to sort of share some of those reflections that we've had in the chat, based on sort of the scenarios that you've offered. So sort of the themes that we got from the first scenario was that advice traps feel like you're giving too much information, you're overwhelming the person. It can be quite patronizing, or you're ignoring opinions or belittling the issues. What would you like to say about that?
I did feel overwhelmed, definitely. Yeah, I did feel overwhelmed in the first time. It was a bit of a barrage. I was also grateful, as I think I said, to Phil for giving his knowledge and his great experience. But it did feel overwhelming.
If I'm completely honest, I was a little bit unconvinced by my own advice. Because I was doing it for the purpose of of demonstrating advice, but I knew full well that Hugh knew all that stuff. Really, Hugh knows a lot of stuff, and I knew full well I wasn't really helping. Okay, should we go to the questions?
Of course, yeah. Oh, sorry,
yeah,
Hugh.
No, do you have one, Emily? I was just really stimulated by somebody put a point in the chat that I've just noticed about animation and how animated we are, and these non-verbal things. Words are really important, but also the way that we're presenting ourselves to each other is also important. Phil, would you agree? And what more might we gift people around that?
Well, let's have a go at answering some of these things and see what we can get in the time we have. I see a question. How do you know whether it's a situation where you could or should give advice? I think that's a great question. My answer to that is when it's absolutely clear there's only one solution. It is one scenario where we might have to give advice, where there aren't really options to explore. That's where advice might be helpful. I think those situations are relatively rare. I think another scenario is where there's something to do with technical expertise. If you have definitive knowledge on something, you should share that for sure. But even then, it doesn't necessarily mean the other person has to follow it. They still have choice as to whether they take that advice or not. And sometimes I think advice is important where there's urgency. Just whether it's absolute urgency, we don't really have time to do the kind of reflective thinking and questioning that a coaching approach usually takes. Which question shall I go to next? Who's going to choose?
I think we've had one in the chat which is quite insightful actually, which is how do you get comfortable with the silence if answers don't come easily in those sort of exploration sections, and is it just practice?
That's a great question actually, and I know that particularly when people are beginning their coaching journey, when they're learning to become coaches, it is tough and people feel anxious about it. They wonder if the coaching is working or not. They wonder if the person who's being silenced is engaged. I take silence as good news, as long as it's not too long. I take silence as good news. I assume, and I feel justified in my assumption, that when people are quiet in a coaching conversation, it's because they're thinking deeply. So I welcome silence, and I've learned just to ride it. I've learned that if I stay quiet, the other person will eventually speak, and not only will they speak, but they'll speak from having had a chance to do their best thinking. Great question.
And if I could just add a little bit extra, when we're running a workshop, I often make a point about saying there's no such thing as an awkward silence. Our silences are always awesome because it's giving people the time to think more deeply and not be rushed into So, you know, often it can be the person with the loudest voice or the quickest off the mark person to come in with a point. So those silences are magic. And a bit of advice: go on to iTunes or whatever your music streaming service is and listen to the tremolos. You know, they knew what they were talking about and singing about when they said silence is golden.
Silence is golden.
It really is.
Okay, let's move to another question.
I think we might
we've
just
got
have
one.
to.
Oh, sorry, Hugh.
Go ahead, Emily. So sorry.
We've got one from Roma. What is meant by focusing on the whole person and not the work issue?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. It's a question which centers on one of our principles, you know, which was we coach the whole person. Put it at its simplest, we can hear an issue, and if we assume we know the answer for ourselves, that's fine. But if we assume that that answer is going to work for somebody else in exactly the same way, that's not fine. And what we know from our coaching experience is that each person, because of their unique perspective, has to tailor a way forward for themselves that suits them, that's kind of sustainable for them, works for them in their personal ecology. You know, so when we're thinking about coaching the whole person, we're thinking about how they think, about how they approach problem solving, about how they can learn from their own experience as opposed to other people's experience, how they can use their knowledge, their history, their personality to the best advantage. You know, so we're really working with them as opposed to just answering a question. We're not sort of doing Sherlock Holmesy stuff here. We're not just problem solving. We're facilitating somebody doing their best thinking.
Is there anything you'd like to add there, Hugh?
Yeah, I love the Sherlock Holmes reference there. I think it is about discovery and you know, allowing me to discover things just in the conversation that we heard today. I think, you know, I felt welcome as a person, as a whole thing, you know, my background, my values, things like that. Phil knows some of that stuff, but he only knows it because of the conversations we've had in the past where he's discovered that and we've discovered it together in our relationship. So yeah, I think it's holistic is a phrase that's bandied about, but it really does mean something.
Have we got time for a last question?
We've got a couple more, so I will just do these last two and sort of apologise that we might slightly run over time.
Okay.
But what if the coachee is really deflated about their problem and can't come up with options or ideas for themselves?
Yeah, and sometimes people do start getting a bit deflated, you know. Not an easy question, but we stay with them. You know, we aim to never give up is one thing. So we convey to the coachee that we're confident that they'll find a way. We've got a number of ways of increasing their resourcefulness. For example, we have a very powerful kind of tool which enables them to think back to when they had been resourceful. In fact, there's 2 or 3 tools which enable them to investigate their resourcefulness. We find that when they remember those things, when they revisit them, it starts to bring their energy back and starts to bring their confidence back. And because we demonstrate our belief in them too, that can also help them to start feeling confident again. It's a combination of factors, I guess.
And maybe an important thing to say also, Emily, is that coaching isn't therapy. Phil, I know, has done a lot of work around the interface between these different disciplines, and there's a lot of overlap, but we need to be very clear to the people we're working with that you know, they're not coming to us for psychotherapy or some kind of cure in a way that they may go to a medical practitioner for. So we're hot on the ethics of that in our training, and also it doesn't mean that people who are have an underlying issue can't be coached, but we need to be very mindful of what we're doing and what we're not doing within that conversation. But I know from, you know, coaching that I've had that I've turned up in quite an uncoachable state, but the next time, because I was so down about issues, but then, you know, as Phil offered at the end of our conversation, let's have another session, let's rebook. Let's see, we'll stay with you on this issue and
Yeah.
being supported in that kind of way.
Coaching isn't therapy, but it can feel and is therapeutic, and part of that is the quality of the relationship. I'll just ask those remaining on the call, when was the last time you had somebody's undivided, undistracted attention, focused purely on you with the will and the intent to help. You know, even that does good to people's confidence and sense of well-being.
I think that's really insightful there. We do have one final question if we've got an opportunity to answer, but it's, how do we manage the individual who needs to fill a silence and never pauses to think?
Well, sometimes we interrupt subtly by offering a summary. We say, can I summarize here? And that, we ask permission, we're very courteous, but it actually has the effect of stopping somebody. And we do that frequently because we don't want to waste their time. We don't just want them to ramble. We don't just want them to keep on giving us more and more information, which may or may not be relevant. And sometimes we blatantly interrupt. You know, we'd normally, we call it contract for this. We normally contract before the conversation that we may interrupt, and we say, may I interrupt? The reason is we're running out of time, you know. And actually we teach this on our coaching course, and we found from many examples that people don't mind being interrupted. They actually quite like it because it feels like the conversation is being managed and their time is being respected.
Thank you. They were all really great questions. So thank you for those. I'm seeing
very
points.
pertinent questions.
Yeah, really good. I'm seeing Rosemary has said something here about reiterating the context and scope of the coaching conversation is so important, and the contracting, how we set up that conversation at the beginning part of the relationship. You know, thank you so much for all your contributions, and thanks, Emily, for hosting us and letting us do this.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I'll pass back to you just to close up, but I have popped a sort of feedback form and a email if anyone has any other questions, but I'll pass back to you now, Hugh and Phil.
Thank you. I think I just want to say thank you, Phil, and
thanks
everyone for staying with us. And yeah, just you know, best wishes for whatever your next step is around this. Thank you.
Good. I just want to say I enjoy coaching, Hugh, and it should feel enjoyable as well as being helpful.
We're allowed to have fun, yeah?
We're allowed to have fun.
Thanks so much, Phil. Take care. See you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everyone.